oh, it's a Netflix generation, and people don't watch as much theater as they do. They watch their phones. I'm finding that people are really up for the conversation with theater, and that we were having some really exciting success.
My name is Ben Charland, and you're listening to What on Earth is Going On. My guest this week is the Artistic Director of the Citadel Theatre in Edmonton, Daryl Cloran. We have a fascinating conversation about the resurgence and reinvention of theatre, dialogue, and the conversation that takes place and can only take place in the theatre. Training, literacy, and shorthand when it comes to theatre and drama, the business needs of a theatre company, and what it requires of an artistic director and leader. Interactivity, engagement, technology, and the use of technology in the theatre. Now, what's interesting about this conversation with Daryl is his passion. It comes through in every single second, and I hope that it comes through for you. Now, if you like this episode, please give it a rating on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast app that you use, and also on Facebook. You can also visit the website, whatonearthisgoingon.ca, and get in touch with me by email or on social media. Let me know what you think of this episode or any other. And of course, let me know, as always, who you think we should have on this podcast and what you think we should be talking about. I'm excited to hear what you think. Daryl Cloran, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
I'm really excited to chat with you. I've been here to the Citadel Theatre many times in my life for seeing shows and actually just to be in this building. It's such a wonderful space with the atrium, the way that the light comes in right downtown. It's a beautiful, beautiful space. You must be honored to be here.
I am. It is an incredible building and has so much history here. And just the belief that, guys like Joe Schachter and the people that founded the Citadel, 40, 50 years ago, believed that Edmonton deserved a theater of this size, right, to come into this building. And like you're saying, right, they have the whole atrium and the waterfall and 5 different performance spaces. It's incredible.
Yeah, and Edmonton is a city that has sustained this over the years. It's a city that's interested in the arts, but specifically interested in theater.
Yeah.
With the Fringe Festival, which I think is still the biggest in North America. I don't know if that's still true.
Yep.
And of course, the Citadel, which has been the bedrock for the arts and especially theater in this city. So there seems to be a give and take that sustains a building and an institution like this, where cities of the same size might not be able to, or at least you're feeling the pressures of the early 21st century in any case.
Yeah, you're totally right. When I moved here 3 years ago, everybody greeted me with the stat that there are more theaters per capita in Edmonton than in New York, right? There is a very vibrant theater community here. And part of it, I'm sure, is, it snows 10 months a year, so people are looking for something to do indoors. But more than that, there's a real belief in culture and a real belief in theater. And I think you're right that it's totally tied to the Fringe, and it's not a coincidence that we have the biggest Fringe in North America here.
Yeah, and this is a hallmark of your own work. You've done a lot of experimental or at least adventurous work in your career, and I think that explains in part why you've come here. But before I ask the big question, what on earth is going on, why Edmonton? In September of 2016, you moved here from Kamloops, right?
Yep.
Where you were Artistic Director of the Western Canada Theatre.
Yep.
And you came to Edmonton. But you've had a career all across the country. You've done all kinds of work. It seems like you could have gone anywhere. Why Edmonton?
Well, when I was in Kamloops, the opportunity came up to apply for this job, and I had said to Holly, my partner, I'm going to apply. That there's very little chance that I'm going to get it because the Citadel was really the one sort of regional theater in Canada that I didn't have a relationship with. I had been lucky enough to direct across Canada and had worked a lot of places, but I had never worked here before. I hadn't been to Edmonton before. So I didn't have a relationship with the theater, but the more I looked into the history of the theater and the more I looked into this community, the more excited I got. We had a great time in Kamloops. We lived in Toronto forever and then moved from Toronto to Kamloops. So that was a much smaller community, but a really good chance for me to get a sense of how to program a season for a community and how to run a building and how to work in that kind of setting, which then sort of set me up for this opportunity. And it just felt like exactly the right connection for me and for this theater, that we're looking for, somebody that was going to come in and help really sort of open the doors and connect with the community and really start to try to help shine a light on Edmonton as a place where some pretty exciting international stuff can happen.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so we got the big question coming up. You can take this anywhere you like. We can talk about American politics if you want. We can talk about the rainforest of the Amazon, or we can talk about theater in Edmonton, whatever you like. But try to take this question as a big idea question as opposed to a small talk question. So, Daryl, what on earth is going on?
I think theater is having like a pretty incredible resurgence and sort of reinvention of what it is and how it connects with people and its importance in our community. And it's something that I'm thinking about because that's my job to think about it. I'm thinking about because it's the start of our new season, which always feels like a bit of a sort of back to school. We're getting back into rehearsals and that kind of thing, and thinking about like what kind of programming connects with audiences and how to keep that conversation alive. And while it's always, we're always met with sort of the like, oh, it's a Netflix generation, and people don't watch as much theater as they do. They watch their phones. I'm finding that people are really up for the conversation with theater, and that we were having some really exciting success about inviting new communities into the building, both as artists and as aspirants and as audience, and building that kind of connection. So I'm excited about the possibilities.
I'm glad you mentioned that word conversation, because I think that's what theater, for me anyways, can provide in this highly digitized generation, or this highly digitized world. I mean, much of our life now occurs in a space that we can't see. And it occurs on our phones and it occurs on our computers, but it's not tangible. It's not in front of us. And I think a corollary to this is actually board games, the resurgence of board games and board game cafes, and how I'm a collector of board games. I love playing them because, in part, they're an escape from the rigor of the day-to-day, which is so digital and so on my screen, as opposed to the analog old way of getting a few people together, putting your technology away, and using a different kind of technology. A board game is technology, just like theater is technology.
Yep.
I mean, theater is a highly technical form of art compared to even painting, where it can be much more, where my hand goes and where my body goes. Whereas we need to think about lighting, we need to think about the staging, we need to think about the seating and the arrangement and the eye lines and all that stuff. And as a director, I'm sure this is a big part of your career, even though we're talking about the highly technical aspect of it.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because theater, even though it is technical and technological, it has abstracted that, so that our experience, at least for me, is like the experience we're having now of a dialogue, of a conversation. Is that something that you, as an artistic director and as a director, aspire to? Is that something that you're looking for? Is dialogue in theater?
Yeah, totally. Right. We say here a lot, like the play is the first part of the experience, right? Like it's only part of it, right? And more audiences are looking for more than just like, I drive to the theater, I sit in my seat, I watch my show, I drive home, right? Like they're looking for the conversation, they're looking for the engagement, they're looking for the experience around that, so that they can dig in further to whether it's thematically or whether it's that kind of conversation with each other. And it's that kind of, the thing that theater has is that sort of ephemeral nature, right? That's similar to what you're saying about board games, that there's always something slightly different each night. And it's about the fact that these bodies are sharing space together, right? You find in theater, like inevitably it's the moment, that something goes slightly wrong on stage, where the audience all, gets excited for a second, right? Because they feel like, oh, I'm at a thing that, is only happening right now, right? And that like acknowledgement of like, we're in this space together. The first show I directed here a couple of years ago was Shakespeare in Love, and that had a cast of 20 actors in it. And what we would do every night is have the 20 actors walk out on stage before the show started and smile and look at the audience, and one actor each night would welcome the audience and and have the turn off your cell phone speech, but say, hey, I'm John Elliott, I've worked here at the Citadel for the last 20 years, this is my 35th show, this place means the world to me, I'm so glad you're here. Here we go. Right. And just that acknowledgement of like, we're building this together. We know you're there. You know, we're here. Let's create something, and that kind of electricity. And, that particular setup doesn't work necessarily for every show, but just that kind of acknowledgement of shared space. And that's a thing that, that movies can't offer, or that because the movie's going to play whether you're there or not. Right. So finding that.
Yeah. And it's interesting because when I go to the cinema, there's a reduced sense of fear. I know that there's a start and an end to this film, and if something goes differently, it's not what was intended by the projectionist. It certainly wasn't intended by the owner of the theater. However, when you go to a proper theater, there's a gift there.
Yeah.
When something goes quote unquote wrong or just different. And in an interview you actually did for when you were artistic director of Theatrefront in Toronto, which you founded as well, right?
Yeah.
You talked about how a piece of advice that you had been given, that you were giving other playwrights, which was write what you're afraid of, write what you're most scared of. And I think that you could extrapolate that to the theater. We'll do what we're afraid of. And what we're afraid of, I think, is something different. We're afraid that something will go wrong.
Yeah.
As an actor, I'm afraid that I'm going to forget my line. But what more wonderful thing could happen than if I forget my line and someone else does something different and changes the whole trajectory, not necessarily the plot or the story that we're telling, but the trajectory and the energy that's on stage, and how wonderful that is for an audience, whether or not I know that someone forgot their line. Yeah. I know that there's an electricity, that word that you just mentioned, that is now present with us. And to me, that's something that theater can offer that some other art forms can, but most choose not to. But theater, by its design, has to. If we deny that, we're kind of denying what theater is, that ephemeral, live art.
Yeah.
That, again, this word wrong isn't right. This art where when something new happens, that's a part of it, as opposed to something we have to control and remove from the experience. But I know that for directors, it's a fine line. You don't just let chaos into the room and command the show. Otherwise, you're not telling a story.
Yep.
I don't know if it was the same interview, but you also talked about how important it is to tell a story that's worth telling.
Yeah.
And not just the delivery, but the story that you're delivering is what's important. So how do you balance those two things?
Well, I think story is always first, right? Like that's what we're here for. We're here to share a story, and the audience is here to receive or participate in a story, right? So putting that in front of everything. But you're right, like it becomes that kind of like it becomes about control, right? Like where can as a director, where do you give over control to the artists for the storytelling? Because I don't think of myself as much as there are times that I want to create beautiful picture on stage, and to create that picture, it is important that you as the performer stand in that exact place so that exact light can hit you. That's important. But I also don't want to create like a photocopy of a performance every night, right? Like you want to empower the actors to understand the context of the world you're playing in, the rules of the story that you're telling, so that inside that they can make choices that may be slightly different each night depending on what their partner gave them. They may react slightly differently, but because we've agreed on what this world is, they can make a choice inside that's going to keep it alive, right? And keep it true to the story that we're telling, right? You'll always hear actors say, sort of after a show's opened, a couple of weeks into the run, sort of how it's got deeper and they've started to get a better sense of it and connect to it. And that's, it doesn't mean that it's turned on its head and is a different story. It's just building those connections and finding the nuances inside it. And then similarly, it's the idea of like control with an audience. There is something really compelling and satisfying about an audience having some input or some ability to affect, right? And part of that is just by their presence and by, in a more traditional setup, just by the fact that they react or they laugh, or that is going to have a bit of a impact on the play. But even more than that, like more and more, there's lots of different immersive forms of theater where people are exploring how much input is satisfying, right? Like, and you see it in like some of the great work that like Rebecca Northern is doing with plays like Blind Date, where like it's wide open, right? And the play is going to happen based on the audience member she chooses that night, and they're going to come up and we're going to build something together, which gives over a lot of control. But in it, she still has a very specific story structure that she's going to adhere to, because to what you were saying earlier, like the audience doesn't want to come just watch sort of a mishmash of stuff. They want a story at the heart of it. So at one point do you give over too much, and they have more control than they're able to handle to make the story go forward?
Yeah, it's interesting because, here's a question that I've had about the theater for a long time, which is training, right? So as actors, as directors, as writers, we train to do a craft of telling these stories, but telling them in a particular way, dealing with the technology of the theater, again, back to that idea, but also dealing with the thousands of years that we've been doing theater and the lessons that we've learned, whether it's from Aristotle's Poetics or the lessons we've learned from an artistic director working today in London, England, or London, Ontario, or wherever we're looking. But there's also a certain conditioning or training that an audience goes through too. And I wonder, we know this is true with film, for example. So part of the reason that films are so different today in 2019 than they were in the 1930s and 40s is because the way an audience receives a film has changed. You could not show The Avengers to an audience in 1935 and have them understand anything that's happening. Not just because they wouldn't understand the way the world works today, but they wouldn't understand the cues that a director is giving in that film. So a director can easily just communicate to us that this couple is a couple with a glance, with 1/2 a second on film. We know. We don't need anything else. We don't need them to kiss. We don't need 7 lines of dialogue. We don't need a monologue. We need nothing else but that glance. In 1935, that glance meant nothing. We've been trained over the decades of film to see film in a new way, and that has allowed directors to condense and abstract what the film is and condense a lot into an 1.5 hour or a 2-hour experience. And I wonder if the same is true for theater. And if it is, what kind of conditioning does an audience go through? And then the following question would be, does someone from a completely different theater and cultural background, would they be able to see the plays that you're doing here at the Citadel in the same way? In other words, is the electricity that we're talking about, is it universal, or is it based on my years and years of going to the theater and what I expect to see when I see a play? Even if I've never seen a play, I know what a play is. I sit in a theater, I see actors put on costumes and pretend.
Yeah.
So I wonder how much does this idea of training come into place with an audience?
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I think that the idea that like that element of sort of literacy and understanding of the sort of shorthand of theater, I think part of that only comes from attending theater, whether it's like as a student getting the opportunity to have theater in your life. It also just eases your comfort level with it and the ability to engage with the story on that scale, right? Because there's lots of like there's lots of storytelling shorthand that exists in theater in a similar way to what you're describing, right? Like how many times you see a show that because of the budget or because of the setup of it, we're asking the audience to understand that this is taking place in many different places in many different times, but you're seeing it on the same set and they're not actually changing costumes but like
right, and a simple lighting change would communicate that to me. Yeah,
there's that kind of thing. But then I think the other part of your question there, like, which is really interesting to me, is that idea of like the cultural cues that are inside that and how people from different cultural backgrounds experience theater. And I think you're right that can be very different. And certainly some of the work we did with Theatrefront was that kind of exploration into cultural collaboration and the idea of like we did a couple projects where I took a group of Canadian theater makers and we went to Sarajevo and worked with some Bosnian theater makers and made a show together that was about sort of challenging our assumptions of how to make theater and what is good theater and what does performance look like and what is our handshake with the audience and how that changes and that was some of the best sort of kick in the butt about challenging your own assumptions about theater. We did that, and we did a similar project in South Africa with some South African actors, and it was like people from the beginnings of like just how we started to create together were so different all the way through to how we engaged with an audience in a different country. And that's great, right? Because for me as an artist, it really showed me my bias or what I bring into a room and how it can be completely different for artists that are approaching theater from a different cultural background.
I love that idea of the handshake, that you're kind of making a deal.
Yeah.
That the audience and the stage, the theater makers who are on the stage are creating a deal at the beginning. We're going to tell a story and you're going to have to sit there in quiet, but we need you to be engaged with us, or whatever the deal might be, and that deal would shift from place to place. And it's interesting because, the conversation we're having right now for me is really interesting from an artistic angle, as a director, as a writer, as an actor, or an audience member. For the perspective of an artistic director, the leader of a theater company who is trying to grow the audiences of the Citadel Theatre, how do you, again, square this round peg between the need to create theater for those who are literate, those who understand how to engage with a play like Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, those who are steeped in the tradition, and those who may have never seen a play before? Can you do both, or do you have to do different plays for different groups? How do you manage this from that leadership position?
That's a great question. It's probably one that like all artistic directors struggle with, right? Is how to because particularly for a regional theater like the Citadel, our responsibility is to all members of our community, and to your point, like some of whom have a 50-year history with the Citadel and have engaged with all kinds of theater, and some of whom have never walked in before, right? And how to build that relationship so that people feel welcome, and so people feel like the story is speaking to them as well. And part of that is just opening the door and inviting people. Part of it is how to structure a season in a way that allows people to engage at different levels. So different levels, like different ages, in the sense of making sure that here there's programming like Christmas Carol or like Matilda that we did last year that like reaches out to young audiences and starts to build that literacy from an early age. Part of it is also, we've started a program here, which is a newcomers night, where we bring in audience members that are new to Edmonton or new to Canada, so that they can start to experience theater, which is both welcoming someone to the play, but then also giving someone the context before the play of the experience, both like thematically and story-wise, like what's the story I'm about to experience, but also like how can I engage with this story? What's expected of me as an audience member? How does that play? So trying to give people tools to experience it, and a place to have that kind of conversation or that kind of support after it, right? Like particularly if we're going to choose to engage with artists that are telling traumatic stories or triggering stories or stories about their community that are going to have an impact on community members that see the show. As an example, my first season here, we did Children of God, which was the first main stage Indigenous programming that the Citadel had ever done. And in it, it's a story, it's a beautiful story, but it's a story that is very triggering, has a lot in it about children at the residential schools and a family sort of torn apart by that. And so in telling that story and in welcoming those Indigenous artists and storytellers and audience members to our community and to our theater, the thing that we knew we had to do was provide support, because in experiencing that story, there's a lot of trauma carried with it, right? So that show ended up, we had trauma counselors available after the show. We had places for people to go to be able to talk or have support or have a quiet room if they needed to step out of the show. So kind of looking for ways to make people feel like, okay, if I'm going to come take a risk and engage with this, I know it's going to be safe, or I know there's going to be the support that's necessary.
Children of God went on to the National Arts Centre in Ottawa, right?
Yeah, we partnered with them. Yeah, it was a show that when I was in Kamloops that we developed there with Corey Payette and Urban Inc. And then it went to the NAC here, and now it's sort of playing across Canada. Yeah.
Yeah, there's something in what you just said that struck a chord with me when you're talking about storytelling and the importance of the Citadel or any theater, any institution in curating the whole story, not just this 2 hours on the stage, right? There's that famous idea that the play really begins when the curtain comes down. That's when the conversation really starts. Yeah. That's when the play begins to go into your mind, and you have to talk about it with somebody else, or go home and dream about it, or write about it, or think about it the next day, have a conversation at the water cooler. Hopefully that's when the play begins. Obviously, you'd probably agree that a bad play is one where it ends when the curtain draws, and I don't want to think about that anymore. I'm going home because of indifference. But I wonder, I'm sure you've done a lot of thinking about this. To what extent is the Citadel or any theater or theater company or institution there to curate the whole story, to be involved the next day, to be a beacon the seven weeks after a show ends, to still be talking about that story and making sure it still resonates. So we're not just, okay, we've done our part, you go and talk about it, we'll see you later. Come back to us with your thoughts. But actually curating a story from the very beginning, whether the beginning of rehearsals, perhaps, to the continuing resonance in the community of that story. And if that's true, how do you be that kind of curator? And I'm just spitballing here, but yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, totally. I think there's ultimately a responsibility if we're going to choose to tell a particular story or put something out there, then we need to have that kind of connection with our community to help support the conversation as it proceeds. So certainly, with the Children of God example, certainly to say, well, if we're going to engage with this material, there needs to be the support for you in the lobby afterwards, but there needs to be places that you can engage with us after if you need more support or to carry that on. We started a series called the Exchange series that we've where we organize evenings of conversation between primarily between artists and people involved in the theater community that are about those kinds of topics of interest or things in the community right now that are of real import or a real challenge for theater makers, to be able to sort of come together to have that kind of conversation of, okay, how are we going to solve this together, or how are we going to engage with audiences on that level. So looking at where are the ways that we can help facilitate that conversation, because one of the things that we can do, because by virtue of our size and our reach, is we can help amplify things. So whether that be a new play that's being created by a smaller company in town that we can help sort of really shine a light on, or whether that be a conversation or an issue that's being dealt with by a company in town that we can help more people come to the table around. We've been trying to help with that kind of thing.
Could this potentially mean that it changes what it means to be a theater company? Or be a theater in general? Like, could the mandate of a theater change as a result of taking this broader picture of a story's resonance?
Yeah, I think so. I think for sure that, like, if you look at like organizations like the Citadel, for the most part, most of the bigger regional theaters in Canada were started in the 70s around the same time and around the same kind of mandate, and for the most part have like been about each season you sort of picking a group of plays that are a good mix of musicals and comedies and showing that to an audience, right? But I think you can really see a really profound shift, both in artistic leadership now in Canada and in North America, but also around sort of what is a theater community or a theater company, and what is its responsibility to its artists, but also to its city and its community. And I think we're finding much more happening now that is more than just artistic directors are play pickers, and much more about, okay, how are you engaging with your community? How are you ensuring that this is a place where, to your earlier point, where conversation is happening and people are feeling represented?
One thing that I think pervades this conversation is this idea of the handshake, the agreement, the contract between an audience and the performers and the creators on stage. It illuminates how theater is made and what is happening when we're in the audience and on stage. Now, coming up in this conversation, we talk about another interesting concept, which is trust, and how to build trust not just in a single show, but over a season, over perhaps many seasons of shows, and how that's one of the main responsibilities of the artistic director. That's all coming up on this episode of What on Earth is Going On. Well, it seems that there's a good triangulation there between the business need to grow an audience and to do that. If you just pick 4 plays a year and direct one of them, I don't know how sustainable that is over the years, right? Yeah. Because again, I mean, fewer and fewer, I don't know if it's true that fewer and fewer people are seeing plays, but more and more people are seeing stories. More and more people are wanting to engage with stories in any way, if it's on Netflix, then that's where they'll go. So there's the business need, but there's also a cultural need to have not just an archivist of our stories, but the teller and the prism through which the stories are told. Because there are, if we're in a city in Edmonton, which is 1.2 million people now, there's a lot of stories happening.
Yeah.
And it is one singular community in some ways, and in many ways it's a community of 1.2 million individuals. Yep. Well, how does that become linked? And I think, sure, there's government, but that seems to be less and less trusted over time. But there's art and there's culture. And it seems like there's this cross-section between the business need and the cultural need of a theater company, not just in Edmonton, but in any community, to be the prism through which these stories are shared and told. So, in other words, perhaps it's the job of a cultural institution not to tell the stories, but to receive and to say, what stories do we need to be telling, everybody? And then try to give that back in a form that elevates us, perhaps. I don't know. I'm just spitballing, but that seems to me to be what people are looking for, to get away from their phones, to get away from Netflix, is that prism. Yeah.
Yeah. And that, I think your point there too of like, as much as we have to be great at sharing stories, like we have to be great listeners too, right? Like we have to be able to listen to the community and figure out, where are the places that we can help share things, or what are the stories that resonate here, both because we want people to buy tickets.
Yeah.
So we want to do things people want to, but more than that, like what, and having lived, in Toronto and then a smaller community like Kamloops and then here, as much as there's some hit plays like Mamma Mia that like you put that on anywhere, people are going to come. There are lots of stories that are really specific to a particular city or a particular community or a particular mindset that way. So part of it in being, an artistic director of a regional theater is figuring out like what this community is about, right? And how what are the things that audiences are going to respond to here.
So on that note about listening and receiving and sharing stories, what are the stories for you that are desperate and dying to be told, or are screaming out to be told right now?
Well, for us, definitely, I guess to look at the last couple of years of programming we've been doing here, definitely Children of God. That was a really big step for us at the Citadel, was to really engage with an Indigenous story and Indigenous creation process, Indigenous artists. So from that first season, we've attempted to build a really strong connection to Indigenous playwrights and artists, and have, the season after we programmed a play called Red Patch. And this year we're working with Alberta Aboriginal Arts on a play called After the Fire. And one of the first things we did when I first started here was engage an Indigenous associate artist, Christine Frederick, to work with us on how to build. Because part of it is do the play, but much more than that is, if you're going to do the play, how are you going to build the conversation around it? How are you going to make people feel welcome as an artist, as an audience member? And part of that is getting to know a community and asking the right questions about how to engage with a community. Because one of the things we find is as we engage with different underrepresented communities that haven't had a place at the Citadel before, while it's great that we do the play, part of it is taking the time ahead of time to set the table before we invite people to it, right? To really do the work ahead of time to ensure that there is room for different artistic process, because it's not just that the content of the play, but often in working with different cultures, the process of building the play is different, right? So for us as an organization that's been around for 50 years, it's being able to loosen our process to ensure that there's room inside that for different creation models as we go along. Because regional theaters get into such a sort of standard, well, we hire the actors come for 2.5 weeks, they do this, and then they go on the stage, there's 3 days of tech, and then off we go, right? And not every process can work that way.
From what I've read about you and in this conversation, it seems to me that you're someone who enjoys trying something new.
Yes.
who would enjoy a different kind of process. Like this time, we're not going to block the play until 2 days before opening night. Whatever, you know what I mean? Like, or a different technical process, or a different process with engagement with the community. What is it? I mean, why do you? I guess it's true that you like that. But why? Why is that?
I don't know. I mean, I think it goes back to the liveness of theater, right? It is like the idea of like really embracing that. I mean, when I first came here, I looked around at like, what are the things we have here that are unique, or that like we should really lean into. And one of them, like we started the conversation, was there are so many spaces here. And so in planning seasons, like last year, we did a couple different projects that like really leaned into that, right? You
mean performance venues?
Yeah, performance venues, and like performance venues, and just like literally rooms,
right?
But, like so we brought in Theater Yes, who are a local site-specific company, and gave them a residency here to develop a show that took place everywhere but the theaters, so that audience members got to like explore the building and watch an ambulatory show that way. And then we did these two plays last year called The Candidate and The Party that took place in two different theaters simultaneously, with the same cast of 10 actors running back and forth between the two theaters, doing two plays at once to two different audiences, which, like fully embraced the liveness of theater. Like we go out every night and say to the audience, like, hey, if an actor looks out of breath, it's because they've just run from the other theater. They're going to do a scene here, and then they're going to run back to the other theater to keep that play going.
Yeah.
And, and it was one of those experiences where the audience got to really lean into, like, this is happening right now.
Well, just as a side, talk about the triangulation once again between business, culture, and art, because everyone who sees The Party is going to come back to see The Candidate.
Yeah, right.
They're going to see what was happening in the other room.
Right, totally, right? It makes you want to, and that's it. Like one of the things in experimenting is always that kind of like, what's the thing that's going to make an audience want to come back, right? And come back to either like see the other side of that experience, or like finding like ways to experience like serialized storytelling at the theater. In Theatrefront, we commissioned 4 playwrights to write 4 standalone plays in this series that we called The Mill. But you could come see one play, have a great experience, it was done. But all 4 stories were a narrative that unfolded over the entire 4 stories, right? So we would run them in rep, and you could come see 4 different plays over a weekend and get this giant story told to you. And like just finding ways for audiences to want to engage on that level. Because I'm a huge fan of like going to see like a 7-hour Robert Lepage, like giant, like I'll give you 7 hours of my time if you want to tell me a epic story like that. If you earn it, totally.
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah. That's another quote of yours from that. Yeah. How do you when you're doing that? How do you make engagement into interaction? If interaction is what you're looking for, so if you want an audience to interact with you, whether it's helping you to tell this story or giving you, whether it's in the rehearsal process or the writing process of a play, and you want people to be engaged so that you, again, receiving their story to share it back, right? Or interactivity when it comes to the play itself. Is that something that's important to you? And if it is, how do you do it?
Yeah, like it's there's an element of, I guess it's some of the things we've already been talking about, right? It's like it's setting up the handshake at the beginning with the audience, right? Like in the first like 5 or 10 minutes of a play, and probably of a movie, but certainly of a play, like you are looking for the cues on what is expected of me as an audience member. And sometimes it's just like, it's Shakespeare, so you're getting used to the language and the rhythm so that you can relax into it. And sometimes it's like, oh, okay, you're going to be in the audience, so am I going to be engaging with you as an audience member? Am I going to play that? Looking for those kinds of cues. Certainly, like in the 2 primary performance spaces we have here are both 700 seats. So we, for the most part, are telling stories here that need to resonate to 700 people a night. So the interactive element of that is far less hands-on for an audience member than you could do in a tiny little space. But like looking at things like The Candidate and The Party, there are elements there where the audience gets to really feel the liveness of it and get to have a sense of that kind of interacting with it in a way that they feel a part of it. Whereas we have a new series that we introduced this year called the Highwire series, which is very much about what are fun, unique ways to engage with art, where you as an audience member get more control. So, like as an example, the show this fall we're doing is Fight Night, and Fight Night. You are literally, as an audience member, handed a little voting device as you walk in, and you vote through the play, and like you vote actors out of the play, and you completely change the course of the play based on your interaction. Or something like Every Brilliant Thing coming up, which is a solo show where the performer uses the audience members to help tell the story. So because Every Brilliant Thing is about a man whose mother was dealing with depression when he was young, and so he started a list of every brilliant thing, of all the wonderful things to live for. And the list over the years got thousands and thousands of things on it. And as audience member comes in, you're given a piece of paper that has a number on it. And as he says, 12, you read off like ice cream. And so you're part of it, right? So you can't, in that situation, you don't change the course of the plot, but you are engaged in the storytelling. And so just finding different satisfying ways like that for audience to be a part of it.
Yeah, part of the reason I ask that is because in researching for this conversation, I found that you, and I tell me if I'm wrong about this, because I couldn't confirm it. I couldn't see it, but that there's a feature film called Late Fragment.
Yeah.
That you co-wrote and directed, which is interactive. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
So I'm right about this. I couldn't confirm this. I'm like, well, should I ask about it? I'll just ask and see what happens. And there's a lot of people out there who say that the future of film and television is interactivity. So Netflix has now done, I think, at least one or two of these interactive shows. Bandersnatch was one of them, which was a Black Mirror episode, where you actually decide how the plot's going to move forward. You decide what the character is going to do at any given moment. It's a pretty simple choose-your-own-adventure sort of plot line. But people have also said that this is going to happen to theater and music and live performance. So that if I'm in a classical music hall watching a symphony, there will be some sense in which my behavior, my reaction to it will affect what is played, how it is played, maybe even what is played, like what notes are played. And some people have said the theater is going to follow along the same lines. Now, I don't know if that means there's a playwright working in a back room in the middle of a show deciding what's going to happen in the second act as an audience member makes some suggestion. I don't know. But do you think that this is in part the future of theater, or is the future of theater going to be this analog resistance like board games are to our cell phones and computers? I mean, where in the spectrum does it fall, or is it both at the same time?
Yeah, like there will always be high-tech experiments in theater. As VR and AR become more sort of readily available, there will be great sort of technological things to play with.
Yeah.
But the heart of it will always be the analog experience that you're describing, right? Right. Because the thing with Late Fragment, right? It was the first interactive feature film, and it was at TIFF, and what we found was it was really cool. Like it was like we wrote, it was almost 3 feature films that then got cut up into a million pieces and sort of almost like spread out on the floor. And you as the viewer would then go through and sort of pick up this piece and then pick up this piece and then pick up this piece. So you couldn't, it wasn't choose your own adventure in the sense of like, if the guy gets shot, he always gets shot.
Right.
You couldn't change that, but you could definitely change your experience and understanding completely, because of a choice you made, you'd be over watching this element, and so you'd only hear the gunshot and you wouldn't.
So it's kind of like Rashomon.
Yeah, that kind of, right? So, but for that, even though we showed it at a lot of movie theaters, it was best experienced as a solo experience where you had control, right? Because what we tried to do at a number of the screenings was was like pass the remote control around, right? And that is like, if you've, when you backseat drive someone else who has a remote control, like that becomes quite a community experience of like how, like, well, that's not the way I wanted to go. Oh, here we go.
But
right?
Isn't that the interesting question though? That to me seems like a really interesting conflict in and of itself.
Yeah.
If I was sitting in a show like that and I felt strongly that person shouldn't have the remote, well, hey, I'm feeling strongly. I'm feeling something. That's my experience as an audience member. And I don't know, there's something fertile there.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. Right. And so how to have that kind of engagement, without, because in storytelling, there's like there's a pace or a drive that you need. Right. And so to interrupt it too frequently to provide, choices or reflection, becomes tricky, right? Because you need to keep going. So where do you find those moments of engagement that either like allow it to continue, or allow it to flourish in that way, or allow that kind of, one of the great things about Fight Night is exactly what you're describing. That idea of you become very aware of the people around you because they are making choices different from your choice, and so how do you help sway them, right? And that one, because it's even further away from a typical play, because you can very much just turn to the person beside you and try to convince them to vote the way that you're going to vote to try to make it happen, right? But what are those moments of engagement that allow that and that work in that live community setting?
Yeah, it's interesting too, because when I think of that spectrum of what theater and the future of theater could do, there's a part of me that wants it to stay pure and iconic. And by iconic, I mean it's going to do something that I am not a part of, and I have to join it. I have to put out my hand for the handshake. Here's what I mean. The best shows I've seen in my life, the ones that stick with me for the longest, the ones that affected me the most, were ones that I hated in the first 10 minutes. In other words, they were the shows that I didn't want to shake the hand. I didn't want to be part of the handshake in the first 10 minutes. I didn't like it. They were of a tone or a language or a style, and it was maybe doing the end at the beginning, and I didn't get it, and I couldn't follow along. Or when I was younger, it was just Shakespeare, and I couldn't understand what the heck was going on. And it was interesting to me because by the end of it, though, if I sat through it and let it happen to me, eventually I put my hand out and shook the hand. Eventually I engaged, and eventually I agreed to the contract.
Right.
And by doing so, my perspective of the world shifted. My understanding of things, my paradigm was now changed. I have changed, which is for me, one of the fundamentals of drama, that people change. The protagonist at the beginning is a different person at the end. Hopefully, I, as the audience member, am a different person at the end of the experience. But that has mostly happened when I didn't like it at the beginning. And I think, and the way I've explained it before is that I had to change my rhythm. I had to be part of a new rhythm. But that wouldn't happen if a play did what I wanted it to do.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen and I've mentioned this on the podcast many times, but it doesn't happen when I go into Netflix, and it only shows me the things that I want to see. It only recommends things that it knows that I will like.
Yep.
And if I'm watching an interactive film or something, well, I'm going to probably choose the things that I've always chosen. So it can probably predict what kind of plot I want. So it's not going to show me the plot that I won't like, but that's the plot that I need to see.
Yep.
That's the story I need to have told to me. And I think, this whole idea is one of the stories that we need to tell today, of the need for us to confront things that aren't easy.
Yeah.
And that might not change just because I feel like it or just because I'm not comfortable, and actually getting people out of their comfort zones a little bit. And I just, what's your response to that? Am I onto something, or do you feel like this is not a triangulation of art, culture, and business?
No, I think you're totally right. Like, your example of Netflix is totally right? Like, more and more we are losing the opportunity for being pushed into something that makes us uncomfortable, because more and more we're just being offered more of the same thing that it's clear we like this, so we'll take more of that, right? I think like one of the interesting relationships in theater is the subscription model, right? So the idea that like you would buy like season tickets to a sports team, we try to build that kind of relationship with audiences where they sign up not just to see one play, but sign up for the experience, right? And it's that, right? It's because it's trying to get people not just to buy the ticket to Mamma Mia because they know Mamma Mia and they like Mamma Mia.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I'm up for this experience, and in this experience, there's gonna be Mamma Mia, but there's also going to be something dramatic that I never would have picked off the top, and there's going to be, so it's building that trust as an artistic director or as a curator with your audience to say, hey, we've put this whole package, this season together for you, that if you go on the journey with us, you're gonna have some great surprises on things that you wouldn't have picked otherwise.
It's like subscribing to a magazine, really, like
Yeah.
the New Yorker or something. That I'm, there's a lot of things in there that I might not read, but if I do, I know that I will be enriched and I will be better for doing so.
Yeah.
And I'm trusting someone else to curate it for me. Yeah.
But that's that model is dying or being reinvented in the sense that because there are so many things competing for people's time and money, and that it is harder for people to say, okay, I'm going to sign up ahead for
a whole year,
6 plays, 8 plays for
Yeah.
a whole year, right? So then it starts to get into what you're describing of just picking the one thing that I know I'm going to like and come into that, and then it's much harder to push people into that conversation.
Yeah. So what do you do about that?
Yeah, it's I think part of it is building trust with audience so that they trust your taste. So for me, the previous artistic director was here for 17 years, so they built like a real,
It was Bob Baker.
a real rhythm and a real understanding and so audiences that liked the work that he was doing totally could trust it, knew exactly what was, what they could expect from it, right? And so with a new person in the job now, it's building that relationship, and some audience members feeling like, yes, I'm totally up for that, and some audience members feeling like this is going in a different direction than I expected, and most importantly, new audience members coming in and feeling like, oh, this is a place where I feel like I'm willing to take a chance now, or where I feel more welcome now, or that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's so interesting because the evolution that you're talking about there is also the evolution of a community.
Yeah.
The Citadel is not just that prism again, reflecting stories to and from a community, but it is a member of a community.
Yeah.
And that evolves over time. And it's interesting because, those who... You can't have the same thing over and over again forever. It has to change. That's fundamental to life. That's fundamental to drama, of course,
Yeah.
but it's fundamental to our experience. And so, I don't... I think there are a lot of challenges that you face as an artistic director that are hard to appreciate until you're in it. Because they're like, one of the themes of this conversation today has been all of these conflicting pressures. Analog and digital was where we started, but we're also talking about the pressure between the business angle, the need to put bums in seats in order to sustain this organization, but also the need to share stories that are relevant and important. And hopefully those two are the same. We all want them to be the same, but it takes a patience to get there.
Yeah.
And sometimes they might be the same, but I will resist because you're not Bob, or you're not doing the plays that I'm used to, or whatever. And there are a lot of challenges that you face, but I think the lesson that I get from you and the energy of you is that you just face them with gusto and interest and passion. I mean, you're just so into this.
It's true.
Yeah.
Whenever I go out and speak to an audience or a group or that kind of thing, I often, people will say afterwards, like, you're so excited about this. I didn't understand everything you said, but you really seem excited. And
how did you get started? How did you get started in the theater?
It's just something I've always done. Like I was in plays in high school. I grew up in Sarnia, Ontario, and was in Sarnia Little Theatre. And I actually, in high school with a group of friends, started a little company called Theatrefront. And then I took that with me to Queen's University and did plays there. And then I took that with me to Toronto and did plays there. So it's in a sense, like what I'm doing right now is the same thing I've always been doing. It's just on a different scale. And I've just always loved that collaboration. That's it.
Is there one thing about your job that you enjoy doing more than any other? Is it the directing? Is it even writing? Is it being the leader of a team? Is it being in the audience seat? Like what role do you relish in the most? Do you look forward to the most?
I think as an artistic director, the thing I look forward to the most is is providing opportunities, right? Like there's so like in the sense of like artists that come forward with ideas or with projects or or a young actor who gets their shot, like just that kind of like giving people an opportunity to shine or to try something or to take that kind of risk. That's a thing that that in running a little company or doing my own plays wasn't something I could do, and now I can. I mean, it's it's a mind shift of, because there are lots of people that like send in plays for us to consider, and we have to say no to lots of them because we don't. But like it's looking at like this is a chance for me to give you this opportunity. I love that. I love to really watch our team or our artists shine that way.
Yeah. Daryl, I've got 10 things now to ask you. This is kind of a newer thing on the podcast. And just give me a quick response to each one. You work in the theater, you used to this kind of stuff, like just, throw away your mind and just respond with your body or whatever, or a sound or a sentence. Brevity is a gift is the thing I try to always say. So the first one is story.
Teller.
Okay. Performance.
Live.
Pretending.
Fun.
Alberta.
Home.
Globalization.
Theatrical.
Interesting. Sorry, why theatrical?
Well, I guess because that's like one of the topics that we're talking about a lot in story development right now, and in new play development, like how looking at sort of globalization and what that means to a regional theater or to like the plays that we commission. So it's a thing that's sort of top of mind for us.
Interesting. Okay. Privacy.
Important.
That's every time I say that, I've tried to say it in almost every time with the 10 things, because it's a subject we're not talking about enough. And almost every time the word that people bring back to, if it is one word, is important.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And I think because for a lot of people, it's like, oh yeah, right. That's important.
Yeah.
And we need to, for me, we need to think about that more.
Yeah.
For you, why is that important?
Well, privacy in the sense of, I guess that connects to like a lot of the conversations we have here at the Citadel and in theater around safe workplaces and around. I do every first day of rehearsal now. We speak to the artists and the team about ways that they can be supported in the work that they're doing, and places that they can go to speak about if they're feeling unsafe or if they're feeling harassed or bullied, or so. Like we've had to build a lot of channels where people can feel confident in the privacy that they're being afforded to be able to speak about things that they couldn't necessarily speak about before.
Interesting.
So that's been sort of in building a structure here to really support artists to feel safe enough to take the risks that they need to take in creative work.
Of course. It's a value that needs to be protected and nurtured.
Yeah.
I worked with, years ago, John Turner, Mump and Smoot.
Yeah.
And that was a big theme of his work, is creating the space that is safe so that you can be vulnerable. Yeah. That you can tell the stories that scare you, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And if you don't have that, if you don't have a private space or some sense of privacy, how can you possibly be creative? It's almost like they're one and the same.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Drama.
Life.
Democracy.
Oh, well, Fight Night. That's like that coming up. Like that's like we programmed that show because the federal election is happening at the same time, and we want to be having that conversation about what is the power of a vote.
Cool. Technology.
I was going to say important again, but like for me, it's like enticing, right? Like we're starting more and more to dabble in like how does technology assist in storytelling? So we got this a big grant recently, National Creation Fund grant, to support the development of this new musical called Prison Dancer. And Prison Dancer is about based on sort of about 10 years ago when there were a series of videos that went viral of male prisoners in Filipino prisons doing these giant dance routines to like Thriller and that kind of thing. And so part of this is we're creating this fantastic stage musical, but the other part is that it has a online digital storytelling component to it. And so how to play in that, how to extend the story digitally to make that compelling for our audience members to engage with it before and after coming to the live experience.
Interesting. That seems to hit on a lot of the things we've talked about. Last one is identity.
Well, the first thing I thought of was dad. So
Cool.
So yes, I'm a father of 2 boys and trying to.
Oh, like you as a dad. Yeah. Okay.
and, like trying to this job can expand to fill every second of the day.
Yeah.
So trying to ensure that I carve out the time to also be a dad.
And it's not just to do the things a dad does, but to be that person,
Yeah,
to have that
totally.
identity as a dad.
Totally.
Yeah. Daryl, this has been a really fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Oh, thank you. This was great.
Cool. To learn more about Daryl Cloran, go to the website whatonearthisgoingon.ca. There you can find all previous episodes as well as a way to get in touch with me. Let me know what you think of this episode or any other on social media or by email. And also tell me who you think we should have on this show and what you think we should be talking about. Your quote of the week is from Oscar Wilde, who says that, "I regard the theater as the greatest of all art forms, the most immediate way in which a human being can share with another the sense of what it is to be a human being." Thanks, as always, to our composer, Andrea Wetstein, for this wonderful music. And special thanks for this episode to Daryl Cloran and the Citadel Theatre in Edmonton, Alberta, for giving us the space in which to record. Next week, we're talking with James Brown in Kingston to discuss polygraphs, technology, and the music of plants. I'll see you then.